The thundering of hooves echoed through the towering sandstone walls of Deadman's Canyon as Hazel Harper clutched her reins, urging her chestnut mare to run faster than she'd ever run before. The summer of 1878 had brought nothing but trouble to Fort Stanton, New Mexico, and now that trouble was gaining on her with every passing second. 4 outlaws from the notorious Rattlesnake Gang were closing in, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that trailed behind them like angry spirits. "Get the woman," one of them shouted, his voice carrying across the canyon like a death sentence. Hazel's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced over her shoulder. She'd known taking her father's strongbox to the bank in Lincoln was risky, but she never expected to be ambushed just an hour into her journey. The gang had appeared from nowhere, emerging from the scrub brush like demons, their faces partially covered with bandanas, eyes cold and determined. The canyon walls began to narrow, the path ahead growing treacherous. Hazel's mare stumbled slightly on loose stones, causing her to lurch forward in the saddle. She fought to maintain her balance while the saddlebag containing the strongbox knocked against her leg $2,000 that represented everything her father had saved from their struggling ranch. Without it, they would lose everything. "You can't outrun us, girl." Another outlaw called, his voice laced with a cruel laugh that sent shivers down Hazel's spine. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat dripped into her eyes, blurring her vision. The walls of the canyon seemed to close in around her, offering no escape. Ahead, the path split, one trail continuing through the narrow passage, the other climbing steeply up the canyon wall. With only seconds to decide, Hazel yanked her reins to the right, guiding her mare toward the steeper path, hoping the outlaws' heavier mounts would struggle with the climb. The mare's muscles strained beneath her as they began the ascent, loose rocks tumbling down behind them. Hazel could hear curses from the men as they followed, determined not to lose their prey. Her hands were raw from gripping the reins so tightly, her knuckles white with effort. She'd never felt such fear, but beneath it was a stubborn determination not to let these men take what belonged to her family. Just as the outlaws began to close the gap, a sharp crack split the air, the unmistakable sound of a rifle shot. The bullet struck the canyon wall just above the lead rider's head, sending fragments of rock raining down. The outlaws pulled their horses up short, eyes darting to find the source of the shot. On a ledge above them stood a lone figure, rifle raised to his shoulder, ready to fire again. Even from a distance, Hazel could make out the wide-brimmed hat and the steady posture of a man who knew how to handle a weapon. "That was your warning," the stranger called out, his voice deep and commanding. "The next one won't miss." The outlaws hesitated, exchanging glances. The lead rider, a man with a scar running from his eye to his chin, spat on the ground before shouting up at the rifleman. "This ain't your business, mister." "I'm making it my business," came the calm reply, followed by another warning shot that kicked up dust inches from the scarred outlaw's horse. The tension hung in the air for what seemed like an eternity before the scarred man jerked his head in a signal to the others. With curses and venomous glares, the 4 outlaws wheeled their horses around and retreated back down the canyon, their threats carrying on the wind. Hazel remained frozen, her mare snorting nervously beneath her, until the dust from the retreating outlaws had settled. Only then did she allow herself to look up at her rescuer. The man had already begun making his way down from the ledge, moving with the agile confidence of someone who knew this terrain well. When he reached her, Hazel found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face that had seen its share of hardship. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were dusty but well kept, the mark of a man who took pride in himself despite the harshness of frontier life. "You all right, miss?" he asked, lowering his rifle. Hazel nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "Yes, thanks to you, Mr. Thomas Everett," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks just call me Tom." "Hazel Harper," she replied, extending a trembling hand. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Everett." "Those men would have no need to think about what might have happened," he interrupted gently. "Question is, what were you doing riding alone through Deadman's Canyon? Don't you know the Rattlesnake Gang's been terrorizing these parts for months?" Hazel straightened in her saddle, her pride momentarily overriding her fear. "I'm on my way to Lincoln. My father is ill, and I need to deposit his money at the bank before our mortgage payment is due. We can't afford to lose our ranch." Tom Everett studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced back down the canyon. "They'll be back with more men. The rattlesnakes don't take kindly to being shown up." He slung his rifle over his shoulder. "I'll ride with you to Lincoln." "I couldn't ask that of you," Hazel protested, though relief flooded through her at the offer. "You didn't ask," Tom replied with the hint of a smile. "I'm offering. My camp's just over that ridge. We can rest your mare there, get something to eat, and head out at sunset. Safer to travel at night with those snakes on the prowl." Hazel hesitated, weighing her options. She'd been raised to be cautious around strangers, especially men she encountered in the wilderness. But there was something about Thomas Everett's direct gaze that inspired trust, and she knew she had little choice. The Rattlesnake Gang would indeed return, and next time there might not be anyone to fire a warning shot. "Lead the way, Mr. Everett," she finally said. "And thank you." As they rode side by side toward his camp, Hazel couldn't help but wonder what kind of man roamed these canyons alone, armed and skilled enough to face down 4 outlaws without flinching. She'd heard stories of bounty hunters, of lawmen working undercover, and of men running from their past. Which was Thomas Everett? Little did she know that this chance encounter in Deadman's Canyon would change the course of her life forever, setting her on a path filled with danger, unexpected allies, and a love that would burn brighter than the New Mexico sun. Tom's camp was simple but well organized, nestled in a small clearing protected by juniper trees and rock formations. A small fire pit sat at its center, currently cold, with a coffee pot and single tin cup beside it. His bedroll was neatly laid out beneath a lean-to shelter made of canvas. A sturdy pinto horse grazed nearby, lifting its head curiously as they approached. "It's not much," Tom said, dismounting and gesturing for Hazel to do the same, "but it's home enough when I'm traveling." Hazel slid from her saddle, wincing as her feet hit the ground. Hours of hard riding had left her muscles aching and stiff. Tom noticed her discomfort but tactfully said nothing, instead taking the reins of her mare. "I'll tend to your horse," he offered. "You rest. There's water in that canteen by the bedroll if you're thirsty." As Tom unsaddled and brushed down both horses, Hazel took the opportunity to observe him more carefully. He moved with purpose and efficiency, his hands gentle with the animals despite their size and strength. This was a man accustomed to taking care of himself and others, she decided. "Have you been in these parts long?" she asked, taking a sip from his canteen. The water was cool and refreshing against her parched throat. Tom glanced over his shoulder. "On and off for about 5 years. I know most of the territory between here and the Colorado border." "Are you a bounty hunter?" Hazel asked boldly, remembering the wanted posters she'd seen in Fort Stanton. Tom's hands paused briefly in their work before continuing. "I've collected a few bounties," he admitted, "but that's not why I'm here now." Before Hazel could question him further, Tom finished with the horses and came to kneel beside the fire pit. With practiced motions, he arranged kindling and struck a match, carefully nurturing the small flame until it caught. Soon, a modest fire was crackling, pushing back the gathering shadows of early evening. "There's jerky in my saddlebag and some hardtack," he said. "Not exactly a feast, but it'll keep us going." They ate in companionable silence as the sun began to sink behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Despite her exhaustion, Hazel found herself studying Tom's face in the firelight, noticing the small scar that cut through his right eyebrow and the way his eyes seemed to constantly scan their surroundings, ever vigilant. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, setting aside the remains of her meager meal. Tom considered the question, poking at the fire with a stick. "Those rattlesnakes have hurt too many good people," he said eventually. "I've been tracking them for weeks, trying to figure out their patterns, where they're hiding out." "Are you a lawman?" Hazel pressed. A shadow passed over Tom's features. "Used to be deputy marshal out of Denver." His jaw tightened. "Not anymore." The way he said it made it clear this wasn't a subject he wished to pursue. Hazel respected his privacy, though curiosity burned within her. Instead, she told him about her father's ranch near Fort Stanton, how they'd struggled since her mother died 3 years earlier, and how the drought this year had nearly ruined them. "Pa took sick about a month ago," she explained. "Pneumonia. He's too weak to make the trip to Lincoln, and we can't afford to miss this payment." "It's brave what you're doing," Tom said quietly. "Foolhardy maybe, but brave." Hazel smiled faintly. "My father says I've got more courage than sense. Mama used to say the same." As darkness fell completely, Tom extinguished their fire and helped Hazel back into her saddle. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to travel by, and Tom seemed to know every twist and turn of the trail, leading them on a route that would keep them hidden from prying eyes. They rode through the night, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts. Tom's presence beside her was reassuring, solid like the canyon walls around them. Hazel found herself sneaking glances at his profile, illuminated by moonlight, and wondering what secrets lay behind those watchful eyes. Dawn was breaking when they finally rode into Lincoln, the small town just beginning to stir with early morning activity. Tom escorted Hazel directly to the bank, positioning himself vigilantly outside while she conducted her business. When she emerged, the relief on her face was evident. "It's done," she said, smiling broadly. "The mortgage is paid for another 6 months." Tom nodded, pleased by her happiness but still scanning the street with wary eyes. "We should get you back to your father. He'll be worried." "He will," Hazel agreed, "but first let me buy you breakfast." "It's the least I can do." They found a small cafe where the aroma of fresh coffee and frying bacon drew them in. Over a hearty meal, their conversation flowed more easily, the success of their mission and the safety of civilization loosening Tom's reserve. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to track from a Pawnee scout who'd worked with the Army, and about his dreams of someday having a place of his own, away from the violence that had marked so much of his life. What he didn't tell her not yet was why he'd left his deputy marshal position, or why he was so determined to bring down the Rattlesnake Gang. Some truths were too painful to share with someone he'd just met, no matter how much he found himself drawn to her direct gaze and unwavering spirit. As they prepared to leave Lincoln, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A group of riders was approaching 6 men, their horses lathered with sweat from hard riding. Tom grabbed Hazel's arm, pulling her into the shadow of a building. "Rattlesnakes," he whispered, his expression darkening. "Including the ones from yesterday." Hazel's heart began to race as she recognized the scarred leader, "How did they find us?" "They must have guessed you were headed to Lincoln," Tom replied grimly. "We need to get out of here without being seen." They slipped through alleyways and behind buildings, making their way to where they'd left their horses. Tom helped Hazel mount quickly, then swung into his own saddle. "We'll take the back trail," he said. "There's a shortcut through Bonito Canyon that few know about. It'll get us to Fort Stanton by nightfall if we push hard." They had just reached the edge of town when a shout went up. Looking back, Hazel saw the scarred outlaw pointing in their direction, his face contorted with rage. Within moments, the gang was in pursuit. "Ride," Tom urged, and they galloped away from Lincoln, dust billowing behind them. The race was on once more, but this time Hazel wasn't alone. Side by side they rode, pushing their horses to the limit, weaving through scrubland and forest, taking trails so narrow and treacherous that only someone with intimate knowledge of the land would dare attempt them. Tom led with confidence, occasionally reaching out to steady Hazel when the path became particularly dangerous. They lost two of their pursuers at a steep ravine crossing, the outlaws' horses refusing the jump that Tom and Hazel's mounts had made. But four remained, including the scarred leader, more determined than ever. "There's a box canyon ahead," Tom called over the thunder of hooves. "If we can reach it, I know a hidden path up the wall. They'll be trapped inside if they follow us in." It was their best chance. Hazel nodded, gathering her remaining strength to urge her tired mare forward. They rounded a bend in the trail and the box canyon appeared before them, its steep walls rising imposingly on three sides. Without hesitation, they charged in, the outlaws close behind. Once inside, Tom led Hazel to what appeared to be a solid rock face. Only when they were right upon it did she see the narrow, winding path that scaled the canyon wall, partially hidden by overhanging brush. "Go," Tom commanded, helping her start the ascent. "I'll be right behind you." Hazel's mare struggled on the steep path, but the sure-footed animal managed to keep climbing. Behind her, she could hear the outlaws entering the canyon, their confused shouts echoing off the walls as they realized they'd lost sight of their quarry. Tom and Hazel had nearly reached the top when one of the outlaws spotted them. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off rock just inches from where they climbed. Tom drew his revolver, returning fire with careful precision. One of the outlaws fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. "Almost there," Tom encouraged as they neared the rim. Just as they crested the top, a bullet found its mark not in them but in Hazel's mare. The animal let out a terrible cry, stumbling to its knees. Hazel leapt clear as the horse collapsed, rolling away from the edge. "No!" she cried, scrambling back toward her fallen companion. Tom dismounted quickly, pulling Hazel back as more bullets flew overhead. "She's gone, Hazel. I'm sorry." Grief and fury warred in Hazel's eyes as she looked from her dead mare to the outlaws below. "Those monsters." "We need to move," Tom urged, helping her up. "My horse can carry us both, but not if we stay here and get shot." With a last, pained look at her mare, Hazel allowed Tom to help her onto his pinto. He mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he guided the horse away from the canyon edge and into the forest beyond. The outlaws' curses faded behind them, but they both knew this wasn't over. They rode double for hours, the pinto valiantly carrying their combined weight across the rugged terrain. Tom's arm remained around Hazel's waist, steadying her, and despite their dire circumstances, she couldn't help but be aware of his closeness, the strength in his body as it pressed against hers. By late afternoon, the pinto was showing signs of exhaustion. They stopped at a small stream to rest, both dismounting stiffly. "We're still about 4 hours from Fort Stanton," Tom said, kneeling to splash water on his face. "But we can't push him much further like this." Hazel nodded, sinking down beside the stream. The events of the past 2 days were catching up with her, and despite her determination, fatigue was taking its toll. "What will we do?" Tom considered their options, his expression thoughtful. "There's a line shack about an hour from here. Old friend of mine uses it during roundups. We could rest there tonight, continue at first light." "The rattlesnakes?" Hazel asked. "They'll have to find another way out of that canyon, then pick up our trail. It'll give us some time." He paused, studying her face. "Are you all right? That was your horse back there." Hazel swallowed the lump in her throat. "Penny was with me for 6 years. She was a good horse." Her voice broke slightly. "But I'm more worried about my father. If we don't get back soon, he'll think something's happened to me." Tom nodded in understanding. "We'll get you home, Hazel, I promise." The simple conviction in his voice gave her comfort. In the short time she'd known him, Thomas Everett had proven himself to be a man of his word. They reached the line shack as dusk was falling, a simple one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs, with a small corral attached. It was sparse but sound, offering shelter and safety they desperately needed. Tom tended to his horse while Hazel explored the shack's interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow cot stood in the corner, and a crude table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. It was dusty but clean enough, and the sight of the cot made Hazel realize just how exhausted she truly was. When Tom entered, carrying his saddlebags, he found Hazel sitting on one of the chairs, her head resting on her arms at the table. She looked up, offering a tired smile. "I found some beans and coffee," she said, pointing to a small shelf. "Your friend keeps it well stocked." "Jesse is a good man," Tom replied, setting down his gear. "Always prepared." He built a fire in the fireplace while Hazel prepared a simple meal of beans and the last of Tom's jerky. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and the occasional nickering of the pinto outside the only sounds breaking the quiet night. "Take the cot," Tom said when they'd finished eating. "I'll sleep on the floor." Hazel shook her head. "I can't take your friend's bed while you sleep on the hard ground. We can share it." Seeing his raised eyebrow, she hastily added, "I trust you, Mr. Everett. You've proven yourself honorable." Tom studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "If you're sure." The cot was narrow, meant for one person, but they managed to lie side by side, a respectable few inches between them. Tom had removed his boots and gun belt but remained fully clothed, as did Hazel. The situation was improper by any social standard, but survival in the territories often demanded setting aside conventional propriety. "Tell me why you're really after the Rattlesnake Gang," Hazel said softly as they lay in the firelight. "It's more than just upholding the law, isn't it?" Tom was silent so long that Hazel thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "My wife and son were killed by them 2 years ago," he said. "We had a small ranch outside of Roswell. I was away on martial business when they came. They wanted our horses, our cattle. Emily tried to stop them." He paused, his breathing uneven. "My boy was only 4. His name was James." Hazel felt tears welling in her eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "I'm so sorry, Tom." "I resigned my badge the next day," he continued. "Swore I'd bring them to justice. Been tracking them ever since, picking them off one by one when I could. The leader, the one with the scar, he's the last of the original gang. Name's Silas Gage. The others are new recruits, drawn by his reputation." "That's why you were in Deadman's Canyon," Hazel realized. "You were hunting them." Tom nodded. "I got word they were planning to hit a stagecoach carrying Army payroll. Was waiting for them when I heard your horse coming through, pursued by theirs." His hand tightened around hers. Couldn't let them hurt anyone else. In that moment, something shifted between them. Hazel saw beyond the capable, mysterious man who'd rescued her to the wounded soul beneath someone who understood loss as she did, who fought against it with everything he had. Before she could respond, Tom suddenly tensed, his entire body alert. "Did you hear that?" Hazel listened, hearing nothing but the wind outside. Then the soft nicker of a horse, not their own pinto. Tom was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn. "They've found us," he whispered, moving to the window. Peering carefully through the glass, he counted 4 mounted figures approaching in the moonlight the remaining rattlesnakes, including Sela's Gage. "How did they track us so quickly?" Hazel asked, fear evident in her voice. "Doesn't matter now," Tom replied grimly. "There's no way out except through them." He turned to her, his expression resolute. "Stay down, away from the windows. When I engage them, you run for the pinto. Ride for Fort Stanton and don't look back." Hazel shook her head fiercely. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." "This isn't your fight, Hazel." "It became my fight when they killed my horse and tried to rob me," she countered, then added more softly, "when they took your family." Their eyes locked in the dim light, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. Tom saw the determination in her gaze and knew arguing would be futile. Instead, he reached into his boot and withdrew a small derringer. "Can you shoot?" he asked, offering her the gun. Hazel took it, checking the chamber with practiced ease. "My father taught me," said a woman alone needs to protect herself. Tom nodded, a hint of respect and something warmer flickering in his eyes. "Stay behind me. If anything happens to me, it won't," Hazel interrupted firmly. A voice called from outside, harsh and mocking. "We know you're in there, Deputy Everett. Send out the woman and the money, and maybe we'll let you live." Tom moved to the door, positioning himself to the side. "It's over, Gage. There are soldiers coming from Fort Stanton. You won't escape this time." Cruel laughter was the only response, followed by the sound of breaking glass as a flaming torch was hurled through the window. It landed on the table, flames quickly catching on the dry wood. "Burn them out, boys," Gage shouted. Tom moved swiftly, grabbing his canteen and dousing the flames before they could spread. But more torches followed, crashing through both windows. The cabin's old timber began to catch, smoke filling the small space. "We need to get out now," Tom said, coughing. "They're trying to force us into the open." Hazel nodded, tying a bandana over her nose and mouth. "What's the plan?" Tom looked around quickly, assessing their options. The fire was spreading, but most of it was concentrated at the front of the cabin where the windows were. The back wall remained relatively clear. "There's no back door," he said, "but these logs are old. If we can break through the back wall, we might be able to circle around and reach the pinto." They worked together frantically, using the chairs to batter at the rear wall of the cabin. The aged wood began to splinter, finally creating an opening large enough to squeeze through. Outside, they could hear the outlaws' taunts as they waited for their prey to emerge from the front door. "You go first," Tom said, helping Hazel through the gap. Once outside, they crouched low, moving along the cabin's perimeter toward the corral where the pinto was nervously pawing the ground, disturbed by the smell of smoke. Tom untied him quickly, leading him away from the burning structure. They had almost reached the cover of trees when a shout went up. "They're running, backside." Gunfire erupted, bullets thudding into the ground around them. Tom pushed Hazel toward the pinto. "Go, I'll cover you." But before she could mount, Hazel saw movement to their right. One of the outlaws had circled around and was taking aim at Tom from behind a boulder. Without hesitation, she raised the derringer and fired. The outlaw jerked back with a cry, dropping his gun. Tom whirled at the sound, his eyes widening as he realized what had happened. There was no time for words. More bullets were flying, and the cabin was now fully engulfed in flames, illuminating the night. They both scrambled onto the Pinto's back, Tom in front this time, controlling the reins while Hazel held onto him. They galloped into the forest, branches whipping past as they weaved between trees, trying to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. Behind them, they could hear horses giving chase, but Tom's knowledge of the terrain once again proved invaluable. He led them through a series of ravines and washes, across streams where their tracks would be lost, always pushing toward Fort Stanton. Dawn was breaking when they finally stopped to rest, their pursuers seemingly left behind. The Pinto was near collapse, foaming at the mouth from exertion. They dismounted, leading him to a small spring where he could drink. Tom turned to Hazel, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You saved my life back there." She shrugged, though her hands were still trembling from the night's events. "You've been saving mine since we met. Seemed only fair to return the favor." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, unburdened for a brief moment. "We make a good team," he said quietly. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in danger and mutual respect. Hazel found herself stepping closer to him, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't name. Tom's hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his calloused fingers. The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses, not from behind, but from ahead. Tom immediately pushed Hazel behind him, drawing his gun, but lowered it when he saw the blue uniforms of Army cavalry cresting the hill. "Soldiers from Fort Stanton," he breathed in relief. The patrol leader, a young lieutenant, reined in his horse as he approached them. "Madam, sir," he greeted with a nod. "You folks look like you've had a rough time of it." "Lieutenant," Tom replied, "I'm Thomas Everett, former deputy marshal. This is Miss Hazel Harper from Fort Stanton. We're being pursued by the Rattlesnake Gang, 4 men, heavily armed." The lieutenant straightened in his saddle. "The Rattlesnakes. We've been after them for months." He signaled to his men. "Jenkins, take a squad and scout back the way these folks came. The rest of you form an escort. We're taking them to the fort." As the soldiers efficiently carried out their orders, the lieutenant turned back to Tom and Hazel. "Miss Harper, your father's been worried sick. He sent word to the fort 2 days ago when you didn't return. We've had patrols looking for you since yesterday." Relief washed over Hazel. "My father, he's all right." "Yes, madam. Worried but holding up. Doctor's been checking in on him." With the safety of the cavalry escort, they made good time to Fort Stanton. The Pinto was led by a soldier, allowing Tom and Hazel to ride double on a cavalry mount. Throughout the journey, Tom maintained a protective arm around Hazel's waist, his presence solid and reassuring against her back. They arrived at Fort Stanton by mid-afternoon, dust-covered and exhausted but alive. Word of their arrival spread quickly, and by the time they reached the Harper Ranch on the outskirts of town, neighbors had gathered to welcome Hazel home. William Harper was waiting on the porch, his thin frame supported by a walking stick, his face lined with worry that transformed to joy at the sight of his daughter. Hazel ran to him, embracing him carefully but fiercely. "I made the payment, Pa," she said through tears of relief. "The ranch is safe." "To hell with the ranch," her father replied hoarsely. "I thought I'd lost you too." Tom hung back, allowing them their reunion, but William Harper's keen eyes soon found him. "You the one who brought my daughter home?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Tom answered, approaching the porch and removing his hat. "Thomas Everett." William Harper extended a trembling hand. Then I owe you a debt I can never repay, Mr. Everett. Please come inside. You look like you could use a meal and a rest. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The army patrol that had escorted them returned with news they'd engaged the remaining rattlesnakes in a firefight. 2 were captured, 1 killed, but Silas Gage had escaped, disappearing into the vast territory. Tom remained at the Harper Ranch, helping with chores while William recovered his strength and Hazel grieved the loss of her mare. Each day brought them closer. Small moments building upon one another, shared meals, conversations by the fireplace, quiet rides to check the property boundaries. Tom found himself opening up to Hazel in ways he hadn't with anyone since Emily's death, telling her stories of his childhood, his dreams before tragedy struck, even his fears for the future. In turn, Hazel shared her own hopes and sorrows, her memories of her mother, her struggles to keep the ranch going, her desire to create something lasting in this harsh but beautiful land. They discovered a shared love of literature, Hazel often reading aloud from her small collection of books in the evenings while Tom listened, entranced as much by her voice as by the words. A week after their return, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Tom finally spoke the words that had been building in his heart. "I need to go after Gage," he said quietly. "As long as he's free, he's a danger to everyone in the territory." "To you?" Hazel had been expecting this, dreading it. "I know," she replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "When will you leave? Tomorrow?" Tom turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "But I want you to know I'll come back, if you'll have me." The simple declaration hung between them, laden with meaning. Hazel met his gaze, searching his face. "What are you saying, Thomas Everett?" Tom reached out, taking her hand in his. "I thought my life ended when I lost Emily and James. For 2 years, all I've lived for is vengeance. Then I heard your horse racing through that canyon and everything changed." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I'm saying I've found something to live for again. Someone." Hazel's heart raced as Tom continued, his voice growing more confident with each word. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time. But I think when you find something this rare, you don't question it. You hold on to it with both hands." He stood, drawing her up with him. "I'm not asking for promises now. Just tell me that when I come back we can see where this leads. That's all I ask." Hazel looked up at him, this man who had saved her life, who had shown her strength and vulnerability in equal measure, who made her feel safer than she'd ever felt while simultaneously throwing her heart into the most exhilarating danger. "I'll be here," she whispered. "Come back to me, Tom." In answer, he lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened, years of loneliness and longing giving way to newfound hope. Hazel's arms wound around his neck as she rose on tiptoes to meet him, pouring everything she couldn't yet say into that kiss. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "That's a promise worth coming back for," he murmured. The next morning, Tom departed at dawn, freshly supplied and mounted on a new horse William Harper had insisted on giving him. Hazel stood in the yard, watching until he disappeared from view, her father's supportive hand on her shoulder. "He's a good man," William said. "I see it in his eyes." "Yes," Hazel agreed. "The best I've known." The weeks that followed were filled with anxiety and hope in equal measure. Hazel threw herself into ranch work, nursing her father back to health, training a new mare gifted by a neighbor. Each night she scanned the horizon, waiting for a familiar silhouette to appear. News came sporadically, reports of Silas Gage being spotted near the Mexican border, rumors of Tom's pursuit, stories of gun battles in remote canyons. Hazel collected each fragment of information, piecing together Tom's journey in her mind, praying for his safety. 3 months after his departure, as winter's first chill touched the New Mexico territory, Hazel was returning from town with supplies when she saw a rider approaching the ranch. Even at a distance, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he sat in the saddle. Her heart leapt as she urged her new mare forward, racing to meet him. They met on the open plain, both reining in their horses, their eyes locked across the short distance between them. Tom looked thinner, more weathered, a new scar marking his cheekbone. But his eyes were different, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted. "Is it done?" Hazel asked. Tom nodded once. "Gage won't hurt anyone else, ever." She didn't ask for details. They didn't matter now. What mattered was that he had returned, that the ghosts that had haunted him might finally rest. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In answer, Tom dismounted and walked to her, reaching up to help her from her saddle. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't release her, instead drawing her into his arms. "Now I start living again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you'll help me." Hazel's answer was in her kiss, fierce and certain, her hands framing his face as if to assure herself he was really there. When they parted, both breathless, Tom reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that glinted in the sunlight. "I stopped in Santa Fe," he explained, holding out a simple gold band. "Thought you might need this if you're going to make an honest man of me." Laughter bubbled up from Hazel's throat, joyous and free. "Thomas Everett, is that a proposal?" "The worst kind," he admitted with a grin. "No bended knee, no pretty speech, just a man asking the woman he loves to share whatever life he can give her." "It's perfect," Hazel said, extending her hand. "And yes, 1,000 times yes." As Tom slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing their promise with another kiss, Hazel Harper knew that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings emerged from the most dangerous journeys. What had started with 4 outlaws chasing her through a canyon had led her to the love of her life, a love worth every risk, every danger, every moment of fear they'd overcome together. And as they rode side by side back to the ranch where her father waited, Hazel knew with absolute certainty that their story was just beginning.